So this is going to be the beginning of kind of a one-on-one or a 101 on CA TDM, but its various components and essentially how to get started with building up some rules and jobs that will go and do your good test data routines. CA TDM is an enterprise level test data management piece of software. It's been developed over the best part of the last 10 years. It's got a huge amount of functionality and controls that you can do with it. Some of it makes sense, some of it not as much, and therefore this is really just a guide for best practice and how to get kind of started on doing stuff in TDM. If you've not installed these products that you see in front of you, stop the video now, go to the CA support website, download the latest version of CA Test Data Manager. You will want the latest version. In this case, I'm on 4.0. If you're on an earlier version or a later version than that, you may see some discrepancies in the product set as new features and functionality have been added or removed and all that sort of stuff. And once you've downloaded the product and the associated repository kit, make sure it's all installed. The installation process is quite straightforward. Just run all of the various executables until they stop asking you to press next and say finish and all that sort of stuff. Load in the repository back file. Again, there's supporting documentation on DocOps, so it is relatively straightforward. So I'm going to assume that everyone can get to this point. You also want to make sure you've got some associated kind of databases, so either a travel or a credit card database to play around with. In this instance, we're going to be using a few different ones. I'll show you how we set up new environments and connect to them all, but you do need an underlying database to work with. Again, the repository download kit's got that. If you don't have any, go download the kit, go and restore the back files for the SQL Server or Oracle environments that we provide. They're then yours to do whatever you want with. We have different versions and different databases that you'll see different kind of users of TDM have, so it's good to kind of just keep track of as many of these as possible, as there's some really good examples for how we manage test data. So first things first, we're going to just have a quick walkthrough of CA TDM. So CA TDM is an enterprise level product. There's lots of stuff in here, as I kind of mentioned. When you first launch the product, you get prompted hopefully with this screen. I say hopefully because you can set up multiple underlying repository databases if you want to, so you can connect to kind of different environment spaces that all the TDM work is stored in. We do that through something called a rep XML file, but for the moment we're just going to ignore that and log in. Default username and password is administrator and Marmite, M-A-R-M-I-T-E. And you should then be prompted with a data target and data source screen. If your screen does not look like this or just doesn't have anything in, so it looks like that, it's absolutely fine. These are connections into databases that TDM can connect to and can work with. So first things first is we need to go and create a connection for a data target and a data source. So in this instance, I'm going to be working with a travel and travel E database, like so. If you don't have any databases, what we're going to do is click on this little create new profile down in the bottom left hand corner. Choose what your database type is, so Oracle, SQL Server, or other. Other is actually probably the best one to go for, as it just allows you to kind of come in and choose your DBMS type and so on and so forth. So you'll give it a name, so for example travel, production, however you kind of whatever terminology you work with. Choose a DBMS type. In this case I'm going to use DSM this ODBC, as that's a good one for SQL Server. Choose the relevant driver. SQL Server Native Client 11 is absolutely fine. Your server name, in this case I've got one called localhost, and I know I have a travel database. What we also want to put in is obviously a user ID and a password. So for this I have a user of SA, and hopefully this is my password. Make sure you store it, and this little green test the connection icon is going to just make sure that that is valid. So in this case my SA password is wrong, so let me just try that again. No, that's not right either. Don't think it's... Oh, okay, so I have caps on, and I don't think I have caps on, so if that works, Huzzah! Okay, so make sure your caps are all sorted. Once you got to this point, you can go and save these. These values can be changed at any point. The only thing that can't be changed is the profile name at the top. So just make sure that you're happy with your naming conventions, and everything else can be changed later on if it doesn't work. Click the tick. It will ask you if you want to use the profile now. You can say yes. In this case, this travel profile would be my data source. And you want to go and redo that process for your test environment. So again, I'm going to create a travel, and I'll call this one, let's say this is going to be my testing environment. Again, DSN-less. Go and choose all the things that you need. My database this time will be called Travel E, so that's my database name. And hopefully this time I'll get my password right first off. Connection details are valid, lovely. So make sure you've got something that looks a little bit like that. Click the tick, and this time it's going to be my data target. So because I've got a lot of profiles here, I'm just going to hide a lot of the stuff that's on the screen and just talk about what I'm doing here. So I'm allowing TDM to connect to two different environment spaces. I've got my production environment and my testing environment. You'll notice that there are green arrows and a little target here, basically source target. At the moment, we are connecting to databases, but not actually doing anything. So don't be kind of concerned about kind of this process. This is basically just building a connection profile so that later on we can do some proper work, as it were. Recommendation, best practice, always make sure it's repository. The registry stuff doesn't really matter. It's if you wanted to store your connection profiles in your registry. Repository means that you can share those profiles and that they're actually managed a bit better because it's all central. Make sure these two things are ticked. This will just validate that when we actually connect, that we're connecting A-OK. So just at this point, I'd like to mention that I've not gone through any of the setup pieces or the background pieces here in terms of getting test data on demand kind of connected and working and all that sort of stuff. I'll do a separate video on those bits and pieces. If you want to do those first, I'd suggest you go and look for the videos for or look through the documentation in terms of getting your service that sits above TDM kind of all up and running. What I'll also do as one of the other videos is just a little bit on architecture, just so you can understand what the architecture of TDM is. So hit the little green icon, you'll see it's going to go and connect to my service. My service probably isn't running, so let me just go and start that. The service basically allows me to connect to different parts of the product and make things on demand and that sort of stuff. So this is typically the first screen that you'll get to. So and before you click anywhere else, before you open up anything else, if you've got certain screens on, just close them down and get back to this little view here. You've got your 5 most important icons, I guess, up here. So we've got our data target, our data source, we've got our projects, we've got our data definition, and we've got our published data. In all reality, when it comes to TDM, you'll be in these views more often than you'll be anywhere else, so that's why they're shortcutted. If we click on our little data target window here, that will load us into the schema and connect to the database kind of that we've just gone and set up. So this one we connected to was Travel E. You'll see inside Travel E we've got tables, lots of things that we can go and do, and there's all sorts of things we can do in here. So if I just drag a table across, I can click the little play button and it will go and run that SQL query, and I've got one record in this particular database. I can also use keyboard commands, so Alt and X will also run that query. Alt and A will try and run any query. So if I've got multiple queries, it will try and run them all at the same time, or kind of start at the top and run through them all. Lots of things that we can do in this view. So there's a lot of right mouse click functionality. So if I right mouse click here, I could potentially come and copy some select statements for this particular table, and if I come and paste those in, you'll see that it's just written a little select statement for me. If I want to copy create statements or truncate statements, all that sort of stuff. So there's lots of kind of shortcuts for building up schema, for building up SQL, all that sort of stuff that makes life quite handy. One of the really important things that we use this view for is tree walking through relationships, but I'll get onto that in some of the later videos and later bits and pieces. So you just want to make sure that you can come into this view, that you can query some tables, that you familiarize yourself with these top icons in terms of playing, stopping retrieves, committing information, rolling back, all that sort of stuff. Standard SQL, Oracle, DB2 commands, as you would expect. There are additional, so when you come into this view, you'll see that the top bar changes and you actually get an additional, we'll go up here for SQL, edit options, these guys that typically don't exist. There are some fantastically helpful pieces of functionality in here, like saving your SQL off, writing data directly into the repository. So there's a lot of functionality here. It's well worth having a bit of a play around and seeing kind of what you find and what you find really useful. If you close that view and come into the second icon along, it's exactly the same, but actually now you're connected into a different database, so into travel database this time, so into production or however you want to go and see it. Again, clicking on tables, we've got ways of really kind of speeding up certain processes and that sort of stuff. The next one will open up our projects. Now, as you'll see, I've got quite a few projects going on here. You may have a couple. You've probably got these training products and other bits and pieces. What I would suggest is, for the moment, we're going to build a new project. Not quite yet, but we'll go and build a new project. So you can ignore anything that you've got in there for the moment and just minimize that. Projects are the way that we store jobs and rules in TDM. So if I want to go and extract some data or load some data into an environment space, a project is how I house all of that information. Okay, so I'm going to close that for the moment. Now these other two icons we can't really get into until a little bit later. So if I click on data definition, I've not actually got anything going on at the moment. If I click on publish data, I've not got anything going on at the moment. But we will use these two quite a lot as we go on. So it's worth bearing in mind as I talk about data definitions and publishing data. So just a couple of other important bits. As per the architecture video, there are lots of pieces of TDM, and it's really important to know how to kind of get into those. So at the top, you've actually got a series of drop downs and a series of other things going on. So if I click on data subset, for example, I could click on design extracts and transactions, and that would load my data subsetting tool. I could go to data profiling, and that will allow me to sample my table data. Data design will get me into Agile Designer. If I go to my projects, I can get into my GT diagrammer. So there's lots of ways to almost leave the tool without actually leaving it. So to launch its associated kind of products, and then everything kind of gets stored and saved back locally. So first things first, we need to build a little project. So if you click and highlight on projects at the top, right mouse click it, and you can select new project and version. I'm going to call this one TDM 101, and it's going to be my version 1.0 of this particular project. Now if you expand on this little icon here, which is the little blue arrows, you'll see you can change things like root directory, you can choose your defaults, you can set more levels and do all this sort of stuff. It is a one-time process. Typically 3 levels is enough. This way of organizing, it's very much like your C drive. You can have 3 levels of folders going on, and actually most people don't change these at all, but you can do. So your output directory, for example, you might want to change to be another localized file or whatever. If you're happy, give it a save. It's going to say that once you've done this, you can't change the structure once you've set your level structure, so just be aware. This is typical best practice though, so don't worry too much. Click OK, and you'll get a new project, in this case TDM 101. Now, we are logged in as the administrator, so being the administrator does give you obviously all of the privileges. What you may want to do is go and create yourself a new user so that you only have one project that you want to work on and to focus on in this. For the moment, I'm not going to, do I do that? It's probably a good idea to do that. And you do that through security users and groups. So let's go ahead and make ourselves a new user rather than the administrator, just to tidy up the view and make it a little bit easier viewing. Anything red screened means you've got to be an administrator to get into it. So not everyone can do everything inside the security tab that you obviously don't want them to do. Obviously it does help if you can spell your password. Caps lock issues doing me over again. Okay, so again, lots going on in this view. I'd like you to ignore most of it for the time being. I mean, you can obviously pause this video here if you want to have a bit of a look around and try and understand it. I will go through this in a bit more depth later on. So right mouse click on any user that you see down here. So I'm going to choose administrator, and we're going to copy the should we copy the user, or should we just we'll add a brand new user and show you how to do it from scratch. Give it a name. So this is my TDM user. I'm going to set a password that hopefully it allows me to set. There are rules around length of password and that sort of stuff. I'm also going to just set myself an email address. I'm going to make sure that my access end date is just set to 0, and if once you do that and hit enter, you're going to save a user. It does give you one last look at what we've got going on. So Marmite password, standard stuff. So now I've got a TDM user. Now if I were to try and log in as a TDM user now, it will sort of fail on me. So I come here, I go TDM, I go Marmite, and it's going to say that I've not got a project associated to me, so essentially go away. Fair enough. I could set myself to be the admin of all projects, but I'm not going to. What I actually want to be is the admin of TDM 101. If I give that a save, that's pretty much all I need to do. I say pretty much. We'll go find out, see if anything else is missing. So because I have set up a new user, it has removed it. I don't have the associated connection profiles, so we are going to have to go through that process again and build those connections again. So a little bit of practice. What I could do is I could share those existing connection profiles that my administrator made. So for example, if I come to let's just go to my admin, I note that I could let's say to my admin TDM 101, there is a profile section here which allows me to go and choose, for example, my travel production and all that sort of stuff. And essentially, the administrator can say, look, you can have access to these two little guys here. What I would say is, I prefer to have. No, let's just do that. This should work absolutely fine. I'm sure in the past I've had issues with this, just as a side note. But if I go and do that, basically I've assigned those two profiles to my TDM user. So if I come in and log again as my TDM user, I've now got two profiles. You can see they're slightly different coloured because I'm not the boss of them, but I can still connect to them. I can still go do all the normal stuff. Now, I'm just going to minimize this for the moment, and I'm going to close out my administrator logged in TDM. So we don't need that anymore. So feel free to go and do the same once you've gone through those pieces. First time you log in as a new user, it will give you kind of a startup just to do a bit of a quick build. Feel free to run through that if you want to. Once you've done it once, I'd suggest you untick open a startup in the bottom left hand corner, just because otherwise it will always pop up and it might drive you a bit mad. Otherwise, we're now into the position where we've got a project with a version, we've got two connections into our databases that have been shared to us, and we can start to build out the rest of our project. So lots of right mouse click functionality here. So right mouse click on your folder structure, and we're going to create a new data group. Your folder structure is basically like your C drive. It's just a way of storing things that you build, and there's nothing more or less complex to it than that. You can name things however you want. I suggest you'll probably come up with different formats. I know I certainly change my mind every 6 months as to how I like to arrange my folder structures. First thing I would suggest you do is create one called data generation. If you just click into the description, it will auto-populate that. And I'd also suggest everything you just set to be on demand, because typically you want things to end up being on demand. What we'll then offer you is a data set, and we'll call this one something around, so this is going to be my travel data, something like that. again, leave it on demand. And the last thing it will create is this data pool, and I'm just going to call this one people. So I'm going to generate some people. Okay, this will then create my tree structure on the left-hand side. So what you really need to know is that the green guy, this little cog down here, does all the hard work. These two are more just about structure. In fact, these three are really about structure. It's about being able to share things between one data set and one data group, about being able to, manage where all of your rules and jobs are and that sort of stuff. The next really important thing to kind of recognize is that at the moment we've connected to a database, but we've not actually brought in any information from it. So typically we don't copy data in from a database into our repository. What we will do is kind of copy the metadata that's associated to it. So we take the table structures, we take in the schemas, and we take in a very small amount of data. We don't want to copy the full database. Don't want to copy the full database into our environment, because that's kind of going to be a pretty big footprint that we're going to leave. So under projects, we're going to click register, and register is the act of associating a table to a project. So at the moment my project's empty. I'm going to come to my database tables, click this little green icon, and I'm going to find my people table, and I'm going to go and register it, like so. And that will just go and associate, it will do table orders and all that sort of stuff. And that will now go green in my list, and that basically means that I've registered that particular table. Now, if I just close these, what that actually means is I just give this little refresh, is that inside my project I'll now see that I've got one registered object, and that is this particular table. Now, we can actually click on our data definition button, or you can right mouse click and select edit, either all. Now what I'd say is, if you right mouse click, there's lots of stuff going on here. Edit, publish, properties, delete, and maybe even copy. These kind of top 6, 7 are the ones that you'll use 95% of the time. The other bits and pieces are there to have a look through. Feel free to kind of do that, but at the moment we're just going to say edit my data. If you don't get this data creation assistant, it is because under tool settings, use data creation assistant is not kind of turned on. I'll again cover this in a later video. For the moment we're just going to ignore it, but it's an accelerator for creating data quicker. We're going to do it manually first time, go figure it out manually. And this puts us into our data definition. So what we're going to do here is we're going to build a routine to do some data generation. If I click on my people table, it will open that table for me into this in like a flattened out view. So these are each of the columns and so on and so forth. I can expand this, and there we go. Now, there's lots of really good ways of accelerating the process of generating test data. So, and it's really important to recognize that there are better ways of doing it than just to do it manually. But to start with, as you kind of get used to the tool, I would suggest you do it a little bit manually, and then we'll show you some of the advanced techniques a little bit later on. So plus icon in the top right will insert a new row. We just want one row. And what we'll do is we'll build this one row out, and then when we actually generate the data, we'll say basically multiply this row X amount of times, 100,000 times, with all of the various things that we've put in it to make some good test data. Make sure you save it, and it will recognize that there's red here, so it doesn't want you to. Just say ignore all, and it just means that you're kind of saving is good. So you want to make sure you save on a relatively regular basis. So I'm going to show you how to do a couple of these, and then I'm going to I'll probably stop this video and just allow you to kind of continue on. So first things first, double click in any of the cells. I'm going to start with ID, and you'll get to the data painter. The data painter is basically the data generation engine, the heart of the data generation kind of piece. It's where you build all the rules, you come up with all of your ideas for what you want your data to look like. Now, it's split up into a few different screens here, and for the moment I'm going to ignore lots of buttons on this screen. Okay, the reason being the data painter is incredibly powerful. You can use the functions on this bottom left hand side to generate lots of data or different kind of rules. So just to take an example, we could stick in here some sort of next val sequence, give it a name, and it's just going to fire off that sequence for us like a standard kind of Oracle bits and pieces. Now I did a cardinal sin there of clicking it too many times, but you kind of get the idea. This middle portion is for referential integrity and doing column referencing. So if I need to make sure that my first name and my last name get the same name every time, or whatever, I need to make sure two tables have referential integrity, I would do it with this middle piece. And variables are they're a runtime variable that will change depending on what's going on. So for example, the date, for example, or the system date and time is going to be different potentially every time I run it, and therefore I can make my data really old or really young, or whatever. We'll spend a lot of time in this view, and as we go through it I'll show you some of the more advanced features. For the moment I would just use next val in here, and this is just going to go and find the next watermarked value. So this again is going to be a sequence, and it basically is just going to stop myself from getting duplicate IDs and violating that constraint. One recommended tip here, very important tip: set yourself to double click at the bottom. If you set yourself to single click, as you navigate around, you'll find that sometimes you're accidentally clicking on things that you don't mean to, and you get a pretty crazy formula going on. If you set yourself to double click, you just avoid that problem. Make sure you save that. We'll make sure we save everything. Now, what this is telling me at the moment is that we've got lots of red. Red is bad. Basically, that is a field that my database requires. It's a not null field. Yellow means that you can put data in there or you don't have to. And blues are typically auto-filled. It will also show us foreign keys and primary keys, but as we've only got one table at the moment, we don't really have any of that sort of stuff going on. So I'm not. What I would say is this first video is not teaching you how to build a really good data generation routine. It's just to kind of give you a flavour for some of the things we can do. I'm going to go away from data generation for the moment and just kind of carry on with a guide around the tool set. Feel free, obviously, to finish this in later videos. I'll go through how we do proper data generation, how to kind of, the various functions and things. But this is a good time to pause, play around for 20-30 minutes, try and finish this routine, see if you can get some data in the database, all that sort of stuff. So now that we've kind of run through the basics and set up bits and pieces, it's probably important to just make sure you can launch into other tools and start to try and hopefully get into our data subsetting tool, hopefully get into our Agile Designer tool, GT Diagrammer, all that sort of stuff. And the reason I say hopefully is because if you come up to data subset and click design extracts and transactions, you just need to make sure all of your credentials are okay, you've got the relevant drivers. We are talking about database technology here. For example, it can't locate my profile, so I may have to go and recreate my profiles and that sort of stuff. The tool set that what we're trying to do here, and excuse my terrible English, is we are trying to connect to a database. Different databases have different flavors, have different drivers, have different versions, all of those various things that can cause us issues. So it can be slightly frustrating, but you have to kind of learn a little bit of DBA language if you don't have it. You have to learn where to go for SQL patches, for getting latest drivers and that sort of stuff. DocOps, the support team, all of that sort of stuff. In fact, the community around TDM is very strong in helping out these things, but quite often you'll come across a DBA error and you're kind of going to do a bit of digging around SQL Server or Oracle to find what those problems are. TDM has its biggest issue in that we deal with a huge amount of variation and complexity, and therefore you kind of got to be good at digging around for why a certain database is working different to a different database, or what sort of drivers you need and all that sort of stuff. So anyway, I'm going to take a couple of steps back. what I'm going to do is probably stop this video here for the moment. I'd like these videos to be in relatively kind of short, concise chunks so you can run through them a few times if you're a bit lost or just want to follow on. The next kind of set that I'll get into is looking at things like data profiling. I'll get into data subsetting and a little bit into Agile Designer and those various other areas. Then we'll start to look at some masking pieces, test matching, and all the various components. So by the end of this kind of set of videos, I don't know how long they're going to be. I'd like to think you'll have a project which you can demo or work with, or just kind of typically understand. And we may do some bits around building new databases. We might do some bits around finding some data. There's lots of stuff that we can kind of progress into, and I'll just try and show off as much of the stuff as we can and how. So going to stop this video here. Hopefully this has been a helpful 20 minutes or so. Any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or the teams. If something has changed, just make sure that you're on the right version or on the same version as me, and hopefully this has been useful.